to me try to get the sharing up. I think I'm just going to go ahead. Oh, and in the chat, Liz, I've had my EDD for probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. I just don't use it very often. I never think to use it. So the purpose of our meeting today is it's a Disability Resources and Services Faculty Orientation. And we'll just go right into the next slide. I expect this is going to take us about an hour. So Naj, if you can go to the next slide. Feel free to jump into the chat.
Just a sec.
Questions.
This is the only thing I hate about sharing my screen was to act. There we are.
So that
okay,
actually is the next slide. This is a presentation that is going to be used at all of our campuses. So here's a map of where we all are. Next slide. And let's get into right away, why do we accommodate? So for a lot of you, this may be information that you have heard before, but this is just really a good opportunity for us to review. So our next slide. These are the laws that govern us, and you've probably heard us talk about these before. So we have the Rehab Act of 1973. We have the ADA, which most of you have heard me talk about many times. And then in 2008, the ADA was amended because they found out that the original ADA was too limiting. So the amendment opens it up to a greater number of people. The example that we usually use is with something like epilepsy, where you may be taking medication that helps to manage your epilepsy. The old law says then you weren't covered. The new law says you still are. Next slide. So FERPA, sometimes there is confusion about FERPA. So any documentation submitted to DRS is FERPA protected. There is a FERPA waiver that allows access to a student's maintained educational record. The FERPA waiver does not govern verbal communication with faculty members. And we'll talk a little bit more about this and what my recommendations are. And then if you have additional questions about FERPA, you can always contact the Office of the General Counsel. I know that Melissa Flores has done presentations on that as well. So that's how FERPA impacts us. Next slide. Talking about confidentiality. This is something that I've talked about before as well. So we always want to make sure that the accommodation plans are confidential. So if you are having a conversation with a student about their accommodations, you always want to make sure that it's in a private location where it can't be overheard. You would never want to be in a situation where you're saying students with disabilities won't be taking their tests here, never singling students out. From my office, when we are sending an email to multiple students of our office, we always blind CC those. So students can never see the names of other students who have a disability. Students are not obligated to disclose their diagnosis. And I cannot tell you what the student's disability is. If the student chooses to tell you, they can, but again, that choice is up to them. Lots of times students feel very comfortable talking to faculty about what their disability is and how it impacts them. But again, faculty cannot ask for documentation. That goes only to DRS. We keep our documentation in a separate file. It looks like we are, oh, thank you, Liz. It looks like people are having trouble logging in.
Yeah, I'm seeing that in the chat too.
Nash, do you have to get them in?
They should be able to just click on that link to get in. I have Dan, I'm gonna make you co-host. Are you able to
Linda was
troubleshoot?
now just able to join.
M- Ms. Mohammed, when I tried to log in, it says that the meeting had been canceled. And so I went to my calendar and tried again. And my first attempt, I wasn't able to log in. And then the second time I tried it, I was.
So Jill says people should try logging in from their calendar.
Yes, yes, because we had to do some switching earlier today, so that could be the issue. If people are logging in or they're emailing you, if you could just tell them to log in from their calendars.
And Daniel Rickstein also sent out a message to everybody with an updated link. So I just wanted to share that someone's trying to help troubleshoot it from the CTL side.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate that. I should not know about this calendar. Okay, Linda, do you mind? Can you send myself and Dan a message, and then we'll try to work to get everybody in there. Okay, Liz. Excuse me, not Liz. Pam, go for it. We'll
Next
try to
slide. Who do we accommodate? So we're going to look at the legal definition of disability. We're going to look at who qualifies. We're going to look at some DRS student data. And we are going to look at DRS student registration. I think that's where I'm hoping to spend most of our time. So let's look at the legal definition of disability. So it looks like I have part of this covered up, but I think that's okay. A person who has any physical or mental impairment is considered disabled. And there's a couple of different ways of looking at this, which has really changed over time. So the original way that disability was perceived was as a medical model. So it's a health condition, it's a disease, it's something that's caused by a trauma. And that would disrupt the functioning of a person in a physiological or cognitive way. So what we look at in DRS is really day-to-day living. Do you have a disability, something going on that impacts your day-to-day living? That's the medical model. In the functional model, it's a bit of a different perspective that's caused by physical, medical, or cognitive defects, again, impacting functioning, impacting day-to-day living. So the documentation that we see in DRS talks about functional limitations. How does it impact day-to-day living? I think a really good example of that might be attention deficit disorder, impacts the ability to concentrate, impacts the ability to follow through with instructions. The model that is up and coming now is the social model. And this is the model that is really being pushed at the college level, that a person's activities are limited not by the impairment or condition, but by the environment. So it isn't the person, it's the way our environment is set up to respond to that person. So barriers are the consequences of a lack of social organization. Any questions on that? It's really a different perspective. I've been in the field 15, 16 years, and the social environmental model is really a new way to look at it. Next slide.
Pam, I'm just curious, are you able to see the screen fully, or are you getting any gray boxes by any chance?
The gray boxes come up and then they go away.
Okay, that's because I'm here in the chat trying to troubleshoot at the same time. So that's okay. That is the
And I
challenge.
can keep an eye on the chat rather.
Okay, that'll be good because we're trying to troubleshoot and then I'm sharing at the same time, so it's making it
Yep,
creating
I
those
can
boxes.
see the chat.
Okay, let me go ahead and close it, you guys. I'll let you guys do that.
Would you qualify? This is a really extensive list, but you can see that some of them are physical, some of them are psychiatric, and some of them are more neurological, and that would be students with learning disabilities. Learning disabilities is probably still our largest population of students. Next slide. This is student data. So as I mentioned earlier, we collect all our data in a database called DRS Connect. So this is just a chart that shows successful completion, not of EMCC. This is for all the colleges combined. So for all 10 colleges, we did a report that generated the term enrolled, if students were successful, unsuccessful, completed, or withdrawn. So you can see we have a pretty substantial successful completion rate. And I would give our faculty credit for that, for being willing to work with students. Next slide. Another important slide for all of you. We're going to go right into the next slide and talk about referrals. If a student directly discloses a disability, a health condition, and or pregnancy to you that requires academic accommodation. So if a student comes to you and says, I should be getting my accommodations, please refer them to us so that we can follow through. Particularly for students who are just coming out of high school, where everybody knows their business, they might not realize that when they come to college that they have to contact us and request accommodations. And again, K-12 just being very different. Again, refer to us if the student says, I've requested an accommodation and you haven't received a letter from us. That means they haven't requested accommodations, because when they request accommodations, that triggers that letter automatically that we send to you. Give me just a second, Jen. Yep, so always refer them to our office. Make sure that they know we are available. And sometimes I'll say to faculty, if you don't want to pull the student aside, it's a great announcement to make for the whole class. Jen has asked, does the ADA now legally apply to and protect those who are struggling with post-COVID syndrome? So those people who are long haulers, they follow the same process as anybody else who has a disability. So we would put them through the application process, and then they would need to provide us with documentation. And I believe that those long haulers have that same kind of documentation. And then we can talk to them about what that looks like. I'm not sure that there's a consensus on what those long haulers look like yet, but we would have the same conversation about how it's impacting them, and they would be entitled to accommodations as well, because those long haulers do have an impact on their day-to-day living. Next slide. Documenting referrals at EMCC. So always refer them to DRS, but you can also do a CARES report, and you do that through the dean's office, I believe. And then Sharon will make sure that I get a copy of those. So if you fill out a CARES report and you mention that the student has mentioned disabilities, that is also forwarded to me. And then we have another way to follow through. Next slide. So here's what we do. We act as the first stop for a student requesting an accommodation. We work to create access to campus buildings, activities, curriculum, course content, and degree programs. So it's all about accessibility. On our campus, Randy McNaughton and his team deal with campus buildings. So a number of years ago, Randy and I walked the campus and made a number of changes, looking for things like curb cuts and accessibility on doors. So we've added a number of push buttons for accessibilities. Terry, I'll be with you in just a second. We evaluate documentation and determine reasonable accommodations through an interactive process. So a lot of what we do is about that conversation that we have with students. And we assist faculty and staff with implementation of accommodations. Sometimes I will get emails asking questions about those accommodations, and I'm always really happy to give suggestions and talk about what those accommodations look like. What we don't do, we never modify courses, programs, or tech requirements. So, and we never change grading rubrics. Some of our high school students come out of high school with an accommodation of taking a test multiple times. At the college level, we don't do things like that unless faculty are doing it for everyone else. We do provide academic advising and course placement. At EMCC, those students are referred to advisement so that they get the same level of expertise in their program as any other student. We do not provide tutoring, but we certainly refer. We do not provide personal services such as transportation, toileting, medication administration. Again, from time to time, we will have someone who needs that service, and those students are required to provide their own personal attendance. The college does not do that. We do not ignore students' right to self-determination, and we never assume a student's limitations. That is part of our interactive conversation. So Terry has asked about long haulers. That means people who have been diagnosed with COVID and have effects that remain long-term. I see Jen has posted a link. Looks like Jen Hopkins maybe.
Yeah, it's a John Hopkins article about long haulers for anyone who wanted to get that information.
And that differs from person to person, but the one that I have heard the most frequently has to do with fatigue. Next slide. Thank you for that, Jen. What is the process? The most important thing is our interactive process. And Liz has also talked about brain fog being another long-term symptom. So next slide. This is so very important. Our interactive process and what that timeline comes to. When the Office for Civil Rights comes to any college with a complaint, they're going to say, what's your process and did you follow up? So we always want to make sure that we have followed the process. So for us, over at the DR, Sharon, I'm so glad you were able to get in. For us, the student submits an application. We were so fortunate when the college closed for COVID that we were already doing all of this online. So the student submits their application using DRS Connect. We ask them to submit their documentation. As a part of that, sometimes they're not sure what we need or what to send in. So we would never not talk to a student because they hadn't submitted their documentation yet. The second step is that we conduct an intake. That's where we would discuss what their accommodations might be, what their documentation looks like, what the differences are between high school and college, the importance of staying in touch with us. The third step is that we have determined what their accommodations are. I have found sometimes that people are looking for standard accommodations, particularly for students with learning disabilities, but it really depends on what the student's documentation says. So we might have students who have a learning disability that impacts only math, and they then would be requesting accommodations only when they're in a math course. They might not need it for an English class or a reading class. Students then are required to request accommodations. Again, this is all in DRS Connect. So it's all done electronically. That generates that faculty notification letter that tells you what their accommodations are.
Yeah, mess up.
Next slide. Students are only required to register with us when they're seeking accommodations. Again, if they have a disability that impacts math and they don't have any math classes, they're not required to request accommodations. In terms of providing accommodations, it goes with our academic programs, but if a student is involved in a code of conduct hearing or a Title IX investigation, we are required to provide accommodations for that as well. Same thing with the academic dismissal, and that really applies most frequently to students who are looking for an interpreter. Important to remember, students may have disabilities that don't require accommodations, are undiagnosed but have gone untreated, don't know they qualify, and require a commitment to universal design. The most difficult situation, I think, for students is when they have not been diagnosed at their high school. High schools are required to provide that level of diagnosis at no cost to the student. Colleges do not do that, and that is difficult. Next slide, please. So here's more on our interactive process and who these conversations take place between. So they take place between faculty and DRS. If you ever have a question about providing accommodations, please call us. We are always happy to talk about it. Those letters that we send are auto-generated and are really pretty broad. So if something comes up that you have a question about and it's not addressed in that email that we send you, email us so we can talk about that student individually. Students can talk to you as well. Some students feel very comfortable with that, some do not. I know we had a couple of students who were low vision who used to introduce themselves to faculty before the semester started just to get to know them. They're not required to do that, but that's something they felt very comfortable with. So students in DRS, that's probably the biggest conversation we have because that's where we determine our accommodations. So Pablo has asked, what is the timeline from the moment students contact DRS to being approved? Really good question. We can generally do that in 24 to 48 hours if the student has their documentation. So what happens is the student fills out an application in DRS. We go in and check every day to see if there are applications that we have missed. So the two things that slow us down most frequently are that the student has not submitted documentation and that we call the student to set up a time to meet with them and they don't get back to us quickly. If all that goes well, it goes very quickly. If a student already has their documentation and simply has not requested, once they request, we're checking that every day and it should go out within 24 hours. Next slide. You're welcome. Faculty notification letter. I suspect most of you have received. Yes, Liz, these slides will be available in a Canvas course, and it's also going to be recorded, so you'll be able to go in and look at that one. And you can also call me. So most of you have already gotten an email notification. This is what it looks like. It tells you what the accommodations are. Specifically, most of our students use testing as an accommodation, and it will explain to you how to go through that testing process. And there's a link at the bottom of this usually that talks about testing. I think the first time you go through the testing process, it seems complex, but once you do it, again, it's all online, it goes pretty quickly. Any questions on that? Next slide. I can always talk longer about these things if you need me to. This is what your profile as an instructor looks like. Tells you what the requests are. Tells you the total number of students you have. So our students have a much longer, more detailed profile than our faculty do. Next slide. Again, you can always contact us if you haven't seen this before. Yep, this is your class schedule. Again, part of your profile. You can view students who have accommodation requests. Again, this is all in DRS Connect. Self-explanatory, I think. No questions on that? We'll keep going. Next slide. How does DRS accommodate? Through reasonable accommodations, through reasonable modifications, and through the faculty notification letter. Again, this is going through our process on the back end before that email comes to our faculty. Next slide. Reasonable accommodations are designed to ensure effective participation and equal educational opportunity for students with disabilities. It is not meant to change course requirements, ever. Do not absolve the student from course requirements and responsibilities. Students are doing exactly the same assignments that other students in the class are. Again, that is a difference from what students may have experienced in their high schools. To create access, not advantage. It's meant to level the playing field. It does not guarantee success. Again, sometimes our high schools will have accommodations that do guarantee success. We guarantee access. Never alter essential elements of courses or programs. Exactly the same requirements for the course. Our most common accommodations are extra time on tests and distraction-reduced testing for in-class assessments, for quizzes, for exams, note-taking services. On our campus, over the years, we have found that most of our students are using smart pens to record and take notes rather than having note takers. Also, having PowerPoints up in Canvas has also limited the need for note takers. Yep, our technology is smart pens, sign language interpreters, and then some of our students have modified attendance. That has more to do with chronic disabilities that might require the student to be out of class. I think the most common one would be epilepsy. A student might need a day or two to recover. Next slide. So what is a reasonable modification? A non-essential academic requirement, an examination, or an institutional rule that is necessary to avoid discrimination on the basis of disability against qualified students with disabilities. That's exactly what we've been talking about. Examples of a modification go back to length of time permitted to take the test. That has to do with reading, has to do with processing deficits. Substitution of specific courses required for the completion of a degree. Maricopa does allow for course substitutions for math. I am on the committee that approves those course substitutions, and it does not happen very often. I've never seen it for anything other than math. And then adaptation of the manner in which specific courses are conducted. We've seen more and more of that as we've moved more towards online. Any questions on that? Any questions on math substitution? Next slide. Yeah, this goes back to our process. Students are required to schedule exams in DRS Connect at least 3 business days in advance to use testing accommodations. That is for us to make sure that we have time to notify faculty to get the test over to us and to make sure that we have space for those students. So at EMCC, most students take their tests in DRS, but we have also used the testing center with Nancy Stufflebeam for overflow. Yep, for online exams, it's your responsibility to adjust the students' extra time on exams or quizzes. No matter how much time you allot for students, you need to provide extended time per your faculty notification. Failure to adjust the duration will result in the student not receiving their accommodation. I've always been so proud of our faculty here that we've never really had that problem. Yep, instructors are encouraged to complete the testing agreement for each course at the beginning of each semester. Next slide. This is an accommodation that we very rarely use, and that is called a memory tool. I have seen it used only in math. That is a tool that is developed by the student, but mostly you as the faculty. We are not experts in your courses in DRS, so it's really up to faculty to decide what that memory tool might look like. So it might have formulas, but this comes to DRS from faculty, not from the student. That way we are sure that you have approved what the student is using. And again, very, very rarely used. Next slide. So I have been doing this for a long time. Print accessibility, many years ago, used to come from recordings for the blind, and volunteers would record, and then we would give audio tapes to students. Now, ebooks have become so popular that our students who are blind have a tendency just to get their own books. So it is a service that we provide, but resources like Bookshare are carrying more and more textbooks, and students are able to request those on their own. For students who are blind, we meet with each blind student to talk about the course in which they're registered well in advance of the beginning of the semester. That is dependent on the student, though, letting us know. We discuss the course syllabus and other available information. We identify all materials that need to be provided and or used by students. We talk about written materials. We confirm with the student that the format will be usable. And again, this is a real partnership between the student, our faculty, and DRS. The college will provide timely access to converted co-curriculum material. And again, we are here to help you with that, particularly if students need to have documents enlarged. Most of them have the tools to do that on their own now, but we are here to walk through that with you. When the instructor is not available prior to the start of the course, the program director or department chair will be consulted on behalf of the instructor. I don't think the 9 years that I've been at EMCC that I haven't been able to work with an instructor. Next slide. Modified attendance. So DRS will guide this conversation and develop an agreement between the student and the instructor. We'll review the attendance policy. We'll determine how the policy can be modified, and we'll determine the steps if the student needs to take to re-engage after and absence. So this is really to make sure that we have a plan in place. Sometimes this impacts students who are in classes where participation points are given. By having a conversation with one of our instructors, we came up with a plan where if the student had to miss, the instructor agreed that he would meet with the student during office hours to have that conversation that she missed, and that's how she would earn her participation points. And according to the student, that was one of the best semesters she had, having the opportunity to meet with her instructor one-on-one. Student has a responsibility to notify the instructor of the need for extension as soon as they know they will need one. Sometimes students are very able to do this. Other times that may not be as easy for them. So for example, not very often, but I have gotten phone calls from parents saying, my son or daughter is in the hospital and does not have access to technology. Again, this is where our interactive conversation comes in, where each class is different. Even if it's a 101 class, an English 101 class, could be different in every class. So that's why those conversations are so very important. Next slide. So important, note taking. So instructors have the option to identify a note taker and have them upload notes to our DRS Connect system. At EMCC, it's usually worked out between the student and the note taker. Instructors who wish to review notes before they are uploaded by the note taker can work with the note taker as a part of that process. Assigned note takers who upload notes through DRS Connect will receive reminders to upload notes that they have not submitted for the past 7 days. So through DRS Connect, we can run reports to monitor that. Again, if the notes are going to come from the instructor, it is the instructor's responsibility to make sure that gets done and in a timely manner. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this because this is posted on the Maricopa website, but it has to do with recording lectures. It comes from our general counsel. There are specific regulations that have to do with copyright, and particularly in posting those notes. So if you would like more information on that, you can find that on the Maricopa site. Next slide. Role of interpreters. Again, at EMCC right now, we do not have any deaf students, so we do not have interpreters. But this is information you can always contact us if it should happen that you have a deaf student in your classroom. Next slide. Yep. Working with interpreters, same thing. If you did have a deaf student in your class, we would be happy to go through all of these with you. The most important thing to remember is conversations are always with the student, not with the interpreter. Even if the deaf student is looking at the interpreter rather than at you, your conversation should always be towards this. Yeah, so Linda says she has taught at GCC and have multiple deaf students with interpreter, and it's a breeze. Yep, it works very, very well. I believe that GCC has on-staff interpreters, which is wonderful. Next slide. Closed captioning. Our CTL works with our faculty for what closed captioning looks like and how you can do that. So it has to do with accessibility. What I always say about closed captioning, though, is everyone benefits from closed captioning. We're required to do it for students who need it as an accommodation, but lots of people benefit from closed captioning. And again, the CTL will help you use software such as YouTube, Google Docs. If there was a situation where there was a video that needed to be closed captioned at the last minute, we do have a service that we work with as well. So that would come to DRS, and we would be working with the CTL. But again, that has become so common that it just doesn't happen very often. Next slide. Service animals do not require an accommodation or notice to the instructor. So the animal is considered an extension of the handler, similar to a wheelchair or cane. So you could have a service dog in your classroom and we would not, DRS does not have to know about it. You can see that picture down at the bottom is actually a mini pony. Those are usually, we've never had one on our campus, but they are usually used by people who need help with balance. So they are permitted anywhere the student may go except where food is prepared. Always let us know if you have any concerns about safely. Yep. Yeah, Jill says WebEx will automatically close caption if you set it up to do so. It has just become so much easier. The animal may be removed if disruptive. Yep, so the student always has to be able to manage the behavior of their animal. Emotional support animals are typically not permitted. And for us, it would have to be a dog. So no peacocks, no monkeys. Yeah, so Bill has asked, how do we know if the service animal is legit? So there are two questions that you can ask, and it's, do you have that animal because of a disability, and what service does that animal provide? Those are the only two questions you can ask. So the legitimacy of it, I understand your question. They do, years and years ago, people used to have to provide a badge that proved that that dog had been through training. The law has determined that that is burdensome and people are not required to do. Bill, I can send them to you. Do you have that dog because of a disability, and is it trained to provide a service? I can email those to you as well. Yeah.
To all of us, Pam, because I had an issue with the service animal, if you remember, a couple of years ago, that it was in training and it caused some issues in my classroom. And so I think that that information would be very beneficial, please.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Terry had a situation that really had to do with differences between what service animals do in high school and what service animals do at the college. So I think, Terry, in your case, they were treating that dog more like an emotional support animal and rather than a service dog.
That's why I was wanting some more specifications there, especially if we're not going to get any documentation of DRS. So if somebody just shows up into our classroom with
Right.
an animal, I guess I would like more for clarification, please.
Yep, and yes, and that is what the law says they can do now. Any other questions on that? Next slide. We have 5 more. Oh, perfect. Where can you find additional resources? They are not necessarily listed on the accommodations because people don't have to come to us. If we know, we will tell you. But people don't have to come to us. Next slide. This has to do with some changes in language and how we talk about individuals with a disability. So, and this is in the process of changing as well, but we want to avoid using outdated or exclusive terms such as special needs, handicapped, wheelchair bound. Focus should be on inclusive, people first language, but be aware that a disability may be part of a student's identity. Do not ask or try to guess a student's diagnosis. Yeah, that kind of pushes students into a place where they feel like they have to disclose, which is a violation of their right to privacy. Do not ask for or accept documentation. Sometimes students just won't know. Always refer them to us. You may request doctor's notes to verify non-DRS related absences for your attendance policy. So just like you would treat any other students. Next slide. This is the statement that should be on your syllabus. Hopefully this looks familiar to everyone. I can send this out as well though. Next slide. And again, yep, I will make sure that those 2 questions get sent out along with yes, Dory, I'd be happy to do that. And again, I think this is our last slide, or second to last slide that talks about the change in language. And I'd be happy to send out an article about that, talking about how that language might change. Next slide. I think it's okay. This is how you can get a hold of us. Any other questions for me? I think I've lost it. Oh, here it is. Yep, so I'll send the syllabus, the potential change in language, and the questions that you can ask people who have service dogs. So, any questions for me? Anything that we missed? The faculty resource room is a bunch of articles with additional information. So all of this information along with the slides will be in a Canvas course that I believe you will all have access to if you need to go back. Other questions? Thank you all for coming. Oh, and Nash, did you have anything else?
Me, no, just to remind you guys again that we'll be able to go back and add you all to the Canvas. So if you can just complete that acknowledgement to give you, so you can get the credit for attending class, that will be great.
Yep. So what will happen is you'll complete an acknowledgement form in Canvas that looks like it's in the form of a quiz that will establish a grade book for that at the end of the semester when legal comes back to us to make sure that everyone has completed this mandatory training. That's information that we will submit to legal, who will then submit it to the Office for Civil Rights.
Hi, Pam. This is Erin Bloomstrand. Where's the acknowledgement going to be? In Canvas once we're enrolled?
Yes.
Okay.
Right
Perfect.
now,
Thank you.
that's where I see it.
Yeah.
That's where faculty will see it as well.
When will
Yes.
it be there?
Great.
We'll add you to that course today. So
Okay.
you'll just need to just acknowledge the, there's an acknowledgement in the course. It's a quick course. You've already taken this, so you just need to go in and just acknowledge it, and we'll have it.
Yep.
Okay, so we can do that pretty much right away. Thank you.
Not not right
Well, as
away.
soon
I
as
don't
we
think
add
it's
you guys.
published.
Yeah, as soon as we
I'm-
add you.
What? I didn't
So
hear you.
we're gonna add you to that Canvas course.
Yeah.
And then once we add you, you'll be able to complete that acknowledgement.
So that will be soon?
That will be soon. Yes.
Okay, so we will
Hopefully
be able
today.
to. Okay,
Yeah.
so this week we'll be able to go in. All right.
Absolutely. Yes. Sooner than
Thank
that.
you.
Yes.
Sorry to confuse
You're
anyone.
welcome.
Nope.
No worries.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for attending. If you ever think of any questions after we're done, you absolutely know where to find me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Pam.
Hi.
Bye, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dan, for helping me out too.
Oh,
Troubleshoot.
thank you for helping me out.
Oh, no problem. No problem. So yeah, we'll just sign into, I have to kind of wait till the video renders.
Okay.
And we'll be able to get that squared and then add folks.
Terrific.
So yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Not a problem. Not a problem.
And now you can cross that off your list of things to do.
One of many.
You
And this is
completed your mandatory
that
training.
is true. That very, very true. Very true. So all is well.
See you soon.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.